Big law, consulting, and investment banking are all career paths where students can graduate making six-figure incomes. So why did I go from pursuing big law to investment banking and then eventually land on software engineering? In this video, I'll be answering exactly that, and it all starts with my summer before my freshman year at UCLA. You see, my family immigrated here from Armenia about 7 years before I was born, and so growing up, I still had a lot of the immigrant household instilled into me. This essentially meant that if I wanted even a 0.1% probability of becoming someone who is successful, my only two paths were clear: becoming a doctor or becoming a lawyer. I knew that I wasn't interested in going to med school and graduating when I'm over 30 years old, so it immediately became clear to me that I guess I'm gonna become a lawyer. And I sort of just stuck with that. I didn't really get a lot of insight into what other career opportunities there are out there, especially in the realm of software engineering. Growing up in LA, I guess we're a pretty big metropolitan city, so you might think that tech is pretty popular, but in my little bubble, we definitely knew no one who knew how to code. I knew no one who was a software engineer or what that world of tech would look like. And I really had no exposure up until the university seat. But up until that point in high school, I would participate in mock trial for 2 years and did pretty well at that. I went on to become the president, and that sort of just made me think that, okay, I guess validating this lawyer path even further. When I graduated from high school and I got into UCLA, which was my dream school at the time, with a major in psychology, it really started to hit me that, dang, this is getting pretty real, and I'm only really 1 or 2 steps away from kind of making this decision final for the rest of my career. At this point, I sort of had a little bit of panic set in, and I really started to question a lot of my decisions and go on this deep rabbit hole of what really was out there. The first thing I started out with was understanding what even does a career in law look like. Where do I need to go? What kind of salaries are out there? And just how does recruiting or all of these things work? That's when I stumbled across the world of big law. And if you're not familiar with big law, the TLDR there is essentially that they're the top 100 law firms sort of across the US, and they have a very fixed pay scale that they all kind of follow, and they're well into the six figures. They're the highest compensated sort of lawyers outside of law school. This is essentially the path if you go to a good university or are able to get yourself into a good law school and perform in the upper percentile of that law school, and then you'll get a big law shiny job offer, which will require you to work maybe like 70 to 80 hours a week, and in return, you'll get a pretty good chunk of change. So that was the path. Some of those numbers were numbers that I never really imagined myself making. Didn't really seem too bad to be able to go to law school and then get into a position like that. And so that was immediately the first thing that I had thought of. But then a new sort of criteria dawned upon me. And I think part of this sort of came from growing up. I have an older brother. And so a lot of my life I had been spent hanging out with people who were a couple years older than me. And so that naturally manifested itself into a desire where most of my friends were already finishing up or graduating from university, whereas I was just starting university. And I really couldn't see a world where I was going to be going to school for 7 more years at the time before ever even starting my career. So my new evaluation criteria came about, which was that I want to start my career after graduation. So the big sort of reality check here was that completely punted big law off the realm of reality. So now I was stuck with knowing nothing about what else is out there, knowing that I don't want to do the thing that I've been planning to do essentially my whole life, and trying to figure out what sort of seems like a close second. That's when I learned more about sort of one of these alternative career paths, which is the world of essentially investment banking, which has a similar sort of structure to what big law looks like. A lot of hours, a lot of money, pretty competitive to land. And in all honesty, at this time, I was pretty compensation driven. I had a lot of big goals that were sort of tied to money at the time, especially coming from an immigrant household. I felt like that was some of the opportunities that were awarded to me by my parents sort of making that sacrifice to come here. And so I was kind of seeing what the most lucrative career paths that were out there and figuring out which ones I think I can actually get into or be good at. And that was sort of the entire matching process between what Mark's career is supposed to look like. So I changed my major to business economics or pre-business economics at orientation day at UCLA. And I set out to do this private equity internship, which I actually got through like a referral of like a mutual friend. It was unpaid, but it was at a local firm in the city I grew up in. And it was a very cool experience in hindsight. And mind you, at this time, I know nothing about computer science still. I haven't really stumbled upon software engineering much. I did come across it slightly in my sort of research of what kind of lucrative career paths are out there, but my impression at the time is just that I've never identified as an engineer, I've never thought of myself as an engineer, I've never been the best at math or loved any of those kinds of things, and so software engineering really is like polar opposite to what I could imagine myself doing. So I do this private equity internship, and things are all right. I don't think it's particularly super exciting, but I do get sort of a glimpse into what a successful career path could look like here, and it's something that I feel like is okay on the scale. But then two things start to really bother me. The first one is that computer science is now everywhere. I feel like the odd one out when I walk onto campus and everyone is talking about either a tech startup or how they're learning to code or how much Google is paying their new grad engineers and how their work-life balance looks. Essentially, this is like FOMO in its purest form, where I just had a fear of missing out on what all this coding stuff is about. And so it really started to bug me, and I was like, Mark, you need to at least test out what coding looks like, because you're otherwise going to regret it in the future. And the reason this is sort of particularly nagging at the top of my mind is because I'm hyper aware that software engineering is a career path that fits my criteria of starting to work after graduation. The second thing that is starting to get to me is that as I sign my life away into this investment banking career to make whatever X amount of dollars that might look like, I'm starting to have the difficult reality that working 70 to 80 hour weeks are honestly no joke. And it's something that I think I could do, but I don't know how happy I would be doing it is sort of the equation. Particularly so because I find sort of entrepreneurial ventures important. I also find being there with my family important. And so I really started to face the reality that if I'm working 80 hours per week here, I'm never going to have the time to do things like make these YouTube videos or just see my family and my girlfriend. So I started to think that I should take a little bit more of a bet on myself to figure things out on like a compensation point of view and not just go down this path of signing my life away. And so that's sort of were the two guiding principles that got me interested in starting to dabble with computer science. Actually, the very first thing I did was there was this online coding bootcamp thing that was just free. It was called Open App Academy. And so I enrolled in that and just sort of did their first week of lessons at the same time as my brother. We were interestingly like accountability partners for it. And that was teaching me in Ruby. And so I remember doing like a week's worth of that. And then I figured Ruby isn't a very popular language. I had one other computer science friend sort of advise me to learn Python as my first language. So I found myself over on Udemy taking some Python course. And honestly, nothing up until this point had really scratched the itch that coding had scratched for me. It was very interesting to be able to now unlock this sort of technical skill set that makes me be able to go from idea to actually existing thing fully on my own. And as someone who found entrepreneurial ventures pretty interesting as something like I could see myself doing in the future, nothing felt more closely aligned to that than just being able to have an idea and actually build it into the world. I didn't feel like law or finance were teaching me any of those skill sets really. So at this point, I made the decision that I want to take a bet on myself. I find this interesting enough. I'm going to try to put imposter syndrome of I've never saw myself as an engineer aside because I guess I'm getting this coding thing all right. And that was sort of the initial leap into it. And then as time went on, I'm sort of happy to say that things have actually panned out pretty well. Actually a lot better than I could have ever imagined. I switched my major to computer science and linguistics, which is sort of like this joint major that UCLA provides. So it's a mix of computer science core curriculum and also linguistics classes. And the way that that differs from, say, a regular computer science program is that we have a bit less of the math and physics courses and instead have more of this like linguistics and almost computational linguistics frame. To answer the question of am I happy with my decision, the answer really is absolutely. And anytime I now have a friend come to me or talking about banking or big law, I just can't help but want to tell them to make their switch into software engineering. And the reason is because you really get a lot more ROI out of this in almost every facet of the sort of career ladder. For starters, as a student, there's so many more paid internship opportunities for you to do. So you can just dive heads into a lot of these big tech companies and start to get a feel for what it is that you like to do while also making a ludicrous amount of money. I mean, companies like Netflix pay their interns $63 an hour, give them $10,000 bonuses and all these kinds of things just as a university student. I know a lot of students who have graduated debt-free solely off doing internships and just paying down their student loans as they go as a student. That was something that I was able to leverage pretty well. I ended up doing 6 internships during the 2 years that it took me to graduate university. And so that was pretty wild. I never felt like I could have done that in the whole big law scene. At the same time, I ended up finding myself now as being a full-time engineer having way better work-life balance than I could have ever anticipated going down either big law or the investment banking route. I also didn't really end up taking much of a compensation hit at all. This is one of the myths that I held before, that software engineering may have better work-life balance, but it comes with slower compensation than some of these other paths. But in reality, I know it sounds hard to believe, but oftentimes if you're good at software engineering, you actually get best of both worlds. You get higher compensation with better work-life balance, which is really the set that I found myself in. And once you're here, it's really hard to ever consider what life would have looked like if I hadn't made this switch. The other two things that I think have made me really interested in my decision, sort of continuously moving forward, validating that to me, is that I really find myself more excited about my work because it sort of pushes me more as I go. I'm constantly learning new things. There's always new updates in the tech industry, and it overall makes the whole career sphere feel far more exciting than stagnant. And that definitely is a bit more personal preference, but I'm someone who's really huge on learning and constantly iterating on myself. And so it's interesting how that plays really hand in hand with what the tech industry is sort of looking for out of talented software engineers. And generally speaking, I also do feel like, obviously coming from a biased point of view here, but it's pretty fascinating feeling like you're on the forefront of technology in a sense, where you're sort of pushing human innovation, and some of the most interesting companies out there in the world really hire a ton of software engineers. And so I've always found that very interesting now, where I feel like the challenges and problems that I get to solve are ones that I never really found myself even thinking about being able to solve 2 years ago. So if I've been pretty compelling while sharing my story and you're pretty interested in considering whether or not you want to study computer science yourself and maybe go on to become a software engineer, then I really highly recommend you check out this video that I did that covers should you major in computer science or not. And I think you'll find them really valuable if you're trying to playing the odds in your own head. So I'll see you in the next one.